Okay, we are live to YouTube. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. To the members of the public who've been following along, thank you so much. We're so excited to be kicking off the community engagement phase of this project. We've got our first series of public meetings scheduled for January and February. And there is more information on our website available, you can see here, in different languages. And then also don't forget, the bottom right corner of our website has Google Translate, so it's available in lots of different languages. We will be publishing more information about the meetings and how you can register for the virtual meetings after January 1st. So watch this space for more information. We'll be talking a little bit more about the meetings tonight. So with that, I will thank everyone for joining from the committee and from the various town boards. And I will pass the floor over to Valerie from our planning consultant firm.
Hello, nice seeing everybody again. So tonight we have a full agenda. So we'll get started. The first thing I just wanted to do is just kind of give another little like 10-15 minutes of just a brief snapshot on some of the new information that we've been gathering as part of the inventory analysis. You will be receiving a draft of the inventory analysis. The plan is to send it to you sometime next week. I'll be putting it onto a Dropbox because I think that's the best way. I am going to PDF it because that way I can drop all the maps into the document, and I'll send you an email sort of outlining my kind of the next steps and how best to review the inventory analysis, and then give you some time to review it. I think you'll be meeting as a committee to talk a little bit about it, and then I'm anticipating that when we meet again in March, that we'll be undertaking, not only we'll be going back to deal with the public meeting that we had in the next couple of meetings, but then also to be able to have a little bit of a dialogue and some, information as well as back and forth on the inventory analysis. And so then we're hoping to wrap the inventory analysis up sometime in April. So it will give you a couple months to kind of go through the inventory analysis. If you have any comments, and you'll be able to give those to me as well. So that's the plan. We are on schedule with that, and I'm looking forward to sending you the document. But for tonight, I'm going to get into my presentation just a little bit. So again, I wanted to talk a little bit. I usually like to try to touch upon the schedule each time. We are, again, as I said, on schedule. We've developed the community outreach plan. We're working on the existing conditions. We will have a draft report to you at the end of sometime next week. And then one of the things and we are on target for our first committee meeting workshop, which will take place in January. For some reason, trying to show the arrow. Can you see the arrow? Okay, that's better. The first workshop will take place in January and also in February. Then, as a result of this committee wanting to basically undertake like a 2-month public outreach and get everybody excited for the upcoming public meetings, I wanted to allow for that same type of gearing up for the next public meeting into the overall planning process. And so what I did do is we expanded the overall, if you look at like when the next public workshop is. So the first public workshop was in January and February. And then the next second public workshops are going to be in April and May. And this gives us some time to again, gear up for the public workshops, meet with the overall comprehensive plan steering committee, get you on board, and then also get everybody in terms of the flyers out. We'll have the whole schedule ready to go. And this gives us a little bit more time, where initially we had basically the second public workshop coming right at the heels of the first public workshop. This does not necessarily really change the ultimate overall schedule by much. It just pushes everything off by like an overall 2 months. But I think at this point, based upon everything that we've gone through and how we've organized everything, I think to a larger extent, this should be the last adjustment in the schedule. But if there are any other adjustments, I'll get back to the committee on that. So are there any questions on this?
Okay. I just want to thank you, Valerie, and your team at NPD. You guys have been really great about being flexible with the schedule and acknowledging our shared goal that we all want to do this process well. And we're not rushing to meet a deadline for the sake of meeting a deadline.
Yes, no, absolutely. But I think part of our job is also to make sure there's always forward momentum in this project, because, I've had experiences before where, projects that take too long end up stalling or sometimes never come to completion. So, and I know that that's a goal of the town as well. So that's why we're going to continuously update the committee on the schedule, and then we can make refinements as we go along.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And you and your team are also doing a really great job of making sure that despite any adjustments in schedule, that we are continuing to be on budget and that we're on track for the total project budget. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. All right, so today's focus is going to touch upon the environmental resources, economics, and then historic resources of the town. And again, this is very, I'm taking, the stuff I'm going to present to you is just a snippet of what's actually in the inventory analysis, but this is just to give everybody a sort of a, just an overall sense of where we are with some of the environmental resources and the economics and historic resources. So basically, let's start off with, so as you know, the town is full of many lakes. And so the primary lakes are listed here in this table, along with their overall acres and as well as the depths of the lakes. What's most important is that Scotts Reservoir, Browns Reservoir, and John Mill Lake are all drinking water resources for the city of Norwalk. So they fall within the Norwalk watershed. And I want to also share, a map that I have. Let me just pull that up.
So Valerie, while you're bringing that up, I wanted to mention just quickly, I believe Lake Wakabuk is also a Class A water body. So, and there are roughly 20 homes, I believe, that use that as a source of drinking water. And
so Lake Wakabuk, so we identify all the water quality of the lakes. We do acknowledge the fact that the drinking water resources come from either private wells or are associated with, for example, these reservoirs. But these reservoirs are part of a much larger public system where, like Lake Wakabuk, if anybody pulls from that, it's part of like a private well system. Exactly. So it's a little bit different in its classifications. These are the watersheds themselves. The watersheds here really focus on, the blues are the New York City Department of Environmental Protection watersheds, and the pinks are the Long Island Sound watersheds. And specifically, the Norwalk watershed is the ones where you have a number of your reservoirs that feed into the city of Norwalk. The New York City Department of Environmental Protection, those watersheds and those reservoirs like the Cross River and the Muscoot clearly feed the New York City residents as well as other Westchester County residents. Your residents primarily pull from individual private drinking water wells, and that's mostly from groundwater resources.
Right. So also you say about 17% of the land area is water bodies. Could you give us any context for, is that a lot compared to other towns? A little? Is it average? I have no comparison really.
So it's not really, it's really about your area itself. So in terms of towns, it really depends upon what's the geography of the local communities. I can tell you in that area, there are a lot of wetlands because you have a number of rivers, rivers as well as your lakes. And so they're all associated with wetlands. In terms of other areas within Westchester County, it depends on, if other areas were more developed or less developed, that would really lend itself to whether there's more or less wetlands. So like a lot of your river towns tend to have less wetlands at this point because they're much more developed, and a lot of wetlands have been filled in over time before there was any wetlands regulations. This here on this particular map shows the greens are all like wetlands. They're either federal wetlands or New York State Department of Environmental Conservation wetland areas. So as you can see that you do have a large amount of wetlands, and we also have another map in the inventory analysis that identifies hydric soils, which are typically found around your wetland areas. Hydric soils basically are what they call, they're soils that you will find in wetlands, but that doesn't necessarily mean that because there's a hydric soil, you have a wetland area, but they are in wetland indicators. And so you might even have some additional wetlands within your town that have not been yet identified by either the federal government or New York State. Another thing we wanted to highlight on the environmental section is that you actually have a lot of preserved lands within the town. So all the areas in green are all either public, the dark green are all public preserves, public parks. And then in the lighter greens are other areas that have been preserved, but aren't necessarily, open to public parks or public preserves. So in essence, you actually have, quite a lot of environmental resources. We also looked at the types of endangered and threatened plants and species, and you have 4 endangered or threatened plants and 16 rare birds habitats within the area. There's also other potential birds and amphibians and other mammals that are considered endangered or threatened. And so those are also listed in the report as well. So basically you have a lot of habitat that is of importance to New York State. And I know as you undertake each new development, those all get looked at as part of the development review. All right, so the next thing I just wanted to touch a little bit upon today is economics. So basically, one of the more interesting factors with your economics is that, as you know, you have a number of different hubs, which, in your hamlet areas where your businesses tend to be located. One of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that, your total business count, you have about 443 businesses.
Hey, Val, can you just switch to your other screen? You're still sharing your map.
Oh, I am? That's really strange. Okay, sorry.
No problem.
Did you see my other maps then, for some reason?
Yeah, they're just in a different window.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, can you see this? Can you see the PowerPoint now?
Yep, good.
Okay. Sorry about it. All right. So the business count total is about 443 businesses. And the number of employees that those businesses actually employ are about 2,700 employees. And so what we have done is we broke down into the different types of business classifications. As you can see, most of them are really focused around the service area. Retail trades are two of the highest, as well as what they have like this, what they call unclassified establishments, which means it's a, eclectic mix, and it could be anything that falls outside of these business classifications. But for the most part, Lewisboro does have businesses, but it's, it has a lot of competition with some of like the more concentrated areas, like, for example, Danbury, Connecticut, or you have like Mohegan Lake, and you have a number of like major business areas that actually are, to some extent, are a little bit of competition for the town of Lewisboro because they're within driving distance from a lot of your residents. And so one of the things, I'm going to show you another map. Hold on a second. So this is a map that shows the retail sales of. So this is a map that shows the retail sales of census of block groups around Westchester, in Connecticut, and the green is the town of Lewisboro. So as you can see in the Golden's Bridge area, the darker the color, the more retail sales take place within that block group. And so in the Golden's Bridge area, you clearly you have a large amount of retail sales that are taking place. In your other areas, within the town, which still have retail sales, they're just not as robust as the Golden Bridge area. But if you look at some of the really dark reds, you start seeing a number of those are located around like Ridgefield, Connecticut, Danbury. You also have, your Mount Kisco area, White Plains. So there are a number of larger retail areas, as well as, your business corridors that are within driving distance for Lewisboro. So that's where some of the competition does come into play in terms of establishing some new commercial businesses, as well as commercial districts, or having a robust commercial district in terms of Lewisboro itself. And then I'm just going to get back to. So, and then the last thing we wanted to touch a little upon tonight is your historic resources. You have a tremendous amount of historic resources. I do have another map to show you, so I'll show that in a second. But one of the things that we wanted to just highlight, you do have a number of locally landmarked buildings, and these are ones that are part of like your local landmarks program, where they might not necessarily be listed as on a state or national register, but they're ones that have been under, like they went under review, and they've been acknowledged as being a local landmark in terms of its historic significance to the town itself. One of the things that I wanted to also note is that you don't have any historic preservation laws. You're not a certified local government. So you do have a number of different opportunities, because you have such a robust a number of historic districts, as well as the historic homes within the town, that you could potentially do more historic preservation if the town is interested in pursuing those types of goals and objectives. I'm just going to show you the map of your historic resources. And in the inventory analysis report, we identify all of the historic resources and list them. But basically, you have your Wacabuck Historic District. You have your in Cross River. You have your what we call an eligible historic district. So it is technically, it's an historic district that has been identified, but it isn't technically on the state register. And then you also have other eligible buildings that are identified but aren't officially on the state register. And then you also have the green are your areas of the locally landmarked historic resources. And so all these correspond with tables in the report. You'll see those in the report, but you actually do have a tremendous amount of historic resources in the town of Lewisboro, and it would be really great and something that maybe the town might want to consider in potentially taking the next step and doing a little bit more historic preservation. So that's sort of a quick snapshot, because I know we have to get on to other things. Does anybody have any questions, comments before we move on? Katie?
When you listed the businesses, does that include like work from home operations that are like 1 or 2 people, or how does
No.
that work?
It does not. And those are ones that don't really fall, unless for some reason, like a particular, somebody actually has a business running out of that particular site, that would then potentially get picked up by the US Census Bureau as an official business. But if for some reason you happen to be working from home, or your business is technically at an address somewhere else, then no, it does not get picked up for that. Any other questions?
I see Dan has his hand raised.
Oh, Dan.
Yeah, for the commercial, I think it's, I'm not sure where you're planning to go with it, but I think it's an important area to try and provide more orientation for people, because there's a lot of, you always hear talk about people, we need more commercial, we need more commercial. And a lot of that comes from thinking that's going to be a big boost to the tax, lower your taxes or something. And it may or may not. My guess is that there's little chance that could happen at this level, but that's probably a predominant thought. So I'm thinking we should go, and I can go to the town and try to get them to run some numbers, like the number of tax dollars per acre generated for commercial versus residential, or some way of orienting people, and that should go into these conversations. So just a thought there on that. And a note that we also got the Henry Wallace Farm, which is not like 200 years old, but an important historic landmark of, well, maybe more than 200 years old, but as far as their identification with it, it's a more recent thing. So Henry Wallace, Roosevelt's vice president, the second Roosevelt,
Right. So if a site was not listed, if a site is not locally landmarked and it's not on the historic register for National Register or the state register, or it's not identified as being eligible, it's not listed on that map. So if it is what, so you definitely, and one of the things that we do have in the report are a list of how many buildings were built in certain time periods. So you have even more historic resources than are actually identified on that map, but those would have to be inventoried, and then, could be clearly submitted to the state for official listing. Larry, and then I think Charlene.
Let's go Charlene first, just because she
Okay.
was riffing off something Dan was saying.
Yeah, I think Dan is quite right with the commercial. If one hears, oh, we need a bookstore, or a bakery, that's what you get. So you're right. We have to sort of quell the expectations. The second question is about manufacturing. Is it light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing?
So these are the, let me just I'll just share my screen again. So these are it's just manufacturing. These are the categories that the Census Bureau provides. I mean, I can provide a definition to you, but for the most part, it's manufacturing. I don't it doesn't specifically dive into the details of exactly what types of manufacturing. These are just general categories that, are the businesses, but this gives you a sense of, what types of businesses are your predominant businesses within your community. And clearly manufacturing is not one of the predominant business types.
It's also listed twice.
Oh, thank you.
As is transportation. I was going to send you a
transportation.
note, but the totals are correct. Just
Yeah.
that you've got manufacturing and transportation.
Oh, thank you. I did not even notice that. You know how many eyes have looked at this table? So that is one of the things when you get the draft, that's one of the instructions that is going to be there, that there will be something that you notice that all of us have looked at 100 times and didn't. So thank you. I will fix that.
And
Go ahead.
Well, let's let Larry go.
I just had a note also, going back to the commercial. I agree with Dan that I think it's an important part of this. And I'm wondering if we will have a map or something that will show the traffic counts on the roadways within town, or on some of the roadways within town, because I think that's a key factor that a lot of retail businesses will look at
Yes.
on where to locate.
Yes, we have a map on the AADT, which is average daily traffic volume. So we do have that identified, and which areas are the highest, have most heavily trafficked, which, as you can imagine, are the state roads. Dan?
Yeah, just to close out the commercial, down, I have one more point. I think Charlene was kind of going there in a sense, and that by saying this is not to say we don't want commercial development, but I think what will happen is people need to see it as a quality of life thing as opposed to like a financial cure-all, just finishing that thought.
Yeah, so I think, in terms of the economics, I mean, one of the things that we looked at, or like the chapter itself kind of focuses on, is, if you were to expand, because a lot of communities want to know, can they potentially expand, or, what can they do to bring in some additional businesses? And one of the things that it's clear is that there is competition, considering where Lewisboro is located and the accessibility that there is to other major retail centers with, near Lewisboro. And so that's one of the challenges that you have to bring in some additional retail. That's not to say, or other types of businesses, that's not to say that you can't make a concentrated effort to bring in certain businesses, but there is the competition. And regionally, you are connected to a lot of different state highways that can get you to those areas pretty quickly. Especially for residents of Lewisboro themselves. So, but yes, in terms of the taxes, I mean, that's another issue that would have to be dissected in much more detail. But just adding one additional business doesn't necessarily, change the metrics of your taxes by a tremendous amount. That being said, there are some areas that, do have very high prominent business districts, and they do generate, taxes for the community, and they are a benefit to the community. But residential uses also generate taxes as well. But, then some residential uses tend to generate school kids, which then sometimes counterbalances that. So it just depends on the type of development that would, that comes into a community and what types of taxes they would generate. But a lot of it also deals with how many resources that particular use uses as well.
Did anybody else have a question on this section? Jan, did you have something?
I did have a couple of small things, but I'm going to just send Valerie a note with some
Cool.
details.
That sounds good. Okay, just holding space. So anybody, last thought? Okay, we can move on to the next
Okay.
agenda point.
All right, so the next thing on our agenda is actually we're gonna start focusing on the first public meetings. So I sent out what I call the facilitation. I sent out a facilitation guide for the in-person public workshops as well as the virtual public workshops. And basically, and so I'm going to walk you through both events, and then I'll take any comments or questions that people have. So let's start off with the in-person public workshop. We are anticipating having it from like 9:30 to 12:30 on a Saturday, which is January 21st. And the weather, backup date will be January 28th. We are planning to have as part, like a person will come into the room, they'll pick up like a packet. We'll have what we're going to call ground rules in the packet, just to make sure that everyone understands this is like an open forum, that, everyone's supposed to be respectful of different opinions. There will be a list of questions within the packet for each station and instructions on how to go about each station. And then there will be translators available within for both Spanish and Chinese speakers that day. And we are going to advertise that if for some reason there are some other accessibility or other translations that are necessary, that if we can be told 2 weeks ahead of time, that way we can get the people there available to assist. The first station that somebody will come to will have what I'm calling maps/information. So there'll be some tables on listed for like socioeconomic and housing data that you'll see in the inventory analysis. Then we'll have a land use map, environmental resources map, which will most likely be the water resources, the open transportation infrastructure. So they'll show like probably the major roadways and some of the other major transportation, like in terms of your rail lines, your bus stops, and then also an open space map, which shows where the different uses are in terms of preserves and parks. So this mapping station is really just meant for people to come take a look at, ask any questions that they have. And I find it's actually a very useful station. A lot of times we have people that will come and start really looking at their town for the very first time, and will ask questions and start realizing where they live in relation to other areas within the town that they've actually never visited. So it's a very helpful tool. And then from that station, people will go to the next station, which really focuses on Lewisboro's strengths. And so here we're asking people to identify what they enjoy about Lewisboro, what they think is really important about Lewisboro, where are areas that they find that are very helpful, things that they want to see more of. And so we're going to have basically, it's just going to be almost like a whiteboard, and we're going to have Post-it notes, and people can write ideas and thoughts down on the Post-its, and then they'll post it to the basically the board that talks about Lewisboro's strengths. Then there'll be another section that somebody will go to, which is the Lewisboro weaknesses. And this is where they're going to identify challenges or things that they think that need to be fixed within the town of Lewisboro. And again, it could be areas that need to be preserved. It could be areas that need to be redeveloped. It really is anything that comes to their mind in terms of Lewisboro. And as people go through these stations, they'll be able to read other people's comments, and that sometimes generates other ideas. Also, after they finish looking at the maps, a lot of times that also generates ideas when they start going through these different stations. And then the third station is going to be Lewisboro opportunities. And here we really want people to think, okay, now you just told us what you really like about Lewisboro. You tell us about the concerns that you have. What do you think would opportunities that Lewisboro could undertake that would help with some of the challenges or increase some of the strengths? And so again, it's an open-ended, thought of like, how would you like to see Lewisboro move forward, and what would you like to see Lewisboro undertake in terms of moving it forward in the direction or vision that that person sort of sees. And then the very last station is the vision statement, right? So we really kind of want people to kind of go through this process of like thinking about their town, so that by the time they get to this vision statement, which is basically going to say in the next 10 years, the town of Lewisboro will, this allows them to sort of complete that sentence based upon, their thoughts that they've just gone through in terms of strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. So that is basically the in-person meeting. And so once somebody has done all the different work stations, that at that point, they'll leave the meeting. Any questions on that?
Valerie,
Yeah.
can you just talk us through the role of your team
Sure.
as facilitators? Because I think some of these questions can be a little, like, because they are so open-ended, they can be like a little overwhelming, or maybe like it's hard, but hard to think through in the moment. So what's the role of your people? How do they kind of facilitate and help people kind of get the wheels turning, or do they do that at all?
Yeah, so basically we will have somebody positioned, at, like, the welcome, right? To, welcome people in, get them registered and everything. Then we'll have somebody positioned at the maps, because there's a lot of questions that usually come out the maps, and there's a lot of dialogue. So we'll have somebody there to talk a lot about that. And then the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, will have like a couple people kind of, you're not necessarily somebody having to man each and every one, but they'll be kind of circulating between the two. And what they'll find is that a lot of people will start asking, like, it really ends up being a very much of a dialogue situation, or people will start asking like, well, can I put this down? Or, what do I think about, and somebody will ask them when they put down a comment, then maybe follow up with some additional questions to get them thinking a little bit more. Very rarely have I found, in working through these types of public meetings, especially when you're asking people what they like, what they find problematic, what are opportunities, that they have problems coming up with some ideas. So what we will do, though, and that's part of the reason why we're going to have these maps at the beginning, because it gets them to start thinking about some of these different topic areas that they could start identifying as like the strengths and weaknesses, and then also opportunities. So, I mean, we will be there to answer any questions. We'll be there to speak with people. A lot of times people run into other people. That's the beauty of it. And then they'll start talking to each other. And so, I mean, I've had these things where you think everyone's done in 15 minutes and people are there an hour later still talking. So, and still writing down ideas. So it really is it's a very fluid type of situation. And it's a great, I think, that's why we do those kind of workshops. So it's not so much somebody says one comment and then sits down. This really allows for that kind of organic discussion and flow of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And to follow up on Katie's question, Valerie, can then you talk about what you do with all these Post-it notes and pieces of paper? Are those all recorded verbatim and then you synthesize them, or can you tell us a little bit more about what happens?
Right. So afterwards, what we will do is we will take all the Post-it notes and we will summarize them, right? And we'll summarize them both in terms of like the questions that they're answering, and then also the topic areas. And what you'll start seeing once you go through this process, you'll start seeing certain topics kind of float into the top, or certain issues kind of, becoming more prominent. And then those end up becoming part of your development of your goals and objectives. So if somebody keeps talking about a particular area within the town that needs to be, maybe preserved, that might be something that gets identified as a goal or a strategy within the comprehensive plan itself for that preservation of that land.
John?
Yeah, somebody's got to bring this up. So are there going to be any COVID-oriented rules in this? I mean, if you look at the CDC things right now, we're in an area where indoors is recommended to have masks. So how do you manage that? Or is it just a free-for-all?
Well, I mean, it's up to the town. If the town wants to require masks, we can put that onto the flyer saying, we're asking people to wear masks. In terms of enforcement, that's really up to the town, how you want us to handle that. I mean, we're not going to clearly remove somebody from a room, but we can go up to them and say, we're asking everybody to wear a mask. We can have masks available if that's what you would like to take place.
Okay.
I'll put that on the action item list for us to coordinate with I believe that would be the town supervisor's office.
Yeah, I think so. And then we can just figure out, but yes, we can do that. Now we've also, we actually held a workshop similar to this actually during COVID, when people were still to a larger extent, like just coming out of lockdown. And what we did there, I mean, if for some reason the cases really rise and it becomes, what we did there is we actually had people sort of register ahead of time, and and they came in on a certain time to kind of go through the workshop, and that actually worked out very well. So it's flexible. But I think in terms of, since it's in the gym in the high school, it's going to be a big what? Oh, the cafeteria, thank you. But yeah, the cafeteria is going to be a large area, where we had when we did the one workshop under COVID, it was in a much smaller area. So we wanted to make sure we were able to maintain that like 6-foot distance type of scenario. But this one, it's a much larger area. I think we can easily have people spread out. Any other questions on the in-person? Okay, so then the second form we're going to have, or the second and third forms, are going to be the virtual workshops. These are going to be very similar. But it's going to be a little bit different in format in terms of the initial agenda. We're going to welcome everybody, and then we're going to do a quick PowerPoint presentation. We will, because we are not going to have because we don't have the format where somebody can come and take a look at a map in depth and ask a lot of different questions. We're going to present some of the information as a PowerPoint, and probably more tables than maps, because as you can probably even see when I showed the maps tonight, you want to kind of look at them a little bit closer, you want to see them zoomed in a little bit more, and it's a little bit more problematic in terms of doing that virtually. But what we will do is we will post all the maps that we're going to present at the in-person workshop also online. So everybody will have the same information available to them. And so what we will do, though, is we will highlight some of the, again, socioeconomic information, land use, housing, environmental resources. And so we'll kind of give them a snapshot on a quick PowerPoint presentation, and then we will start moving into the actual event itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to have breakout rooms. We're hoping to have no more than 20 people per breakout room. And what we'll do with that is we will have basically the way it's going to work out is that we'll have somebody share their screen, and that's the facilitator. The facilitator will start off with the ground rules, will specifically, for participants, because sometimes we all know that certain virtual meetings can sometimes get a little bit heated, especially in terms of who tries to dominate a conversation or tries to direct a conversation one way or the other. So we're going to make sure that it is, again, very an atmosphere where people can just express their opinions and have different opinions. And then what we also going to make sure that everyone understands is that once they're finished talking, that we have to allow other people to speak as well. And then what we will do is we will have basically a blank sheet of paper, and then we're going to ask people the same questions that we're asking within the in-person meeting, which is what are your strengths? And then get people to start talking about what their thoughts are in terms of Lewisboro strengths. The facilitator will actually type out the thoughts. So this way it prevents a situation where, somebody feels like they weren't heard, or their comment wasn't taken directly. The facilitator will start typing the comments out, so that person can see, yes, I agree with what you're typing. And then that also allows for, if somebody puts something in the chat function, the facilitator will also pull that information into the again, all the whiteboard is really going to be more of just the basically what you're seeing here, and then they'll type yes, we're going to add that comment to it. So it ends up being the facilitator will start reading the comments out loud, we'll start adding those comments in, getting people to agree or disagree with some of the comments, and then that way we'll have basically a list of strengths. And then we're going to do the same exercise. So then they'll close that sheet down, and they'll open up another blank sheet, and they'll do that for the weaknesses, opportunities, and then the same thing for the vision statement. So it's the same type of exercise that a person will be going through in person, but this time the facilitator will be working with a group of people. And then at the conclusion of the breakout, the facilitator will thank everybody for participating, and then the Zoom will shut down after 80 minutes. So basically we are providing, even though we have everything set for an hour and a half, but we are providing 80 minutes total for the breakouts. So this way allows things to slide, go a little longer if they need to. Any questions on that, Katie?
I know you had mentioned, can you walk us through facilitator to person in breakout room ratio?
Yeah, so I think we're planning to have, well, ideally, we'd like to have no more than 20 people for one facilitator. Ideally, it'd be great if we could have less than 20, and we're gonna ask everybody to pre-register. And so as we're leading up to the events, we'll have a better sense of how many people we have registered for each one of the events, and then how many facilitators we're gonna need. I think, Katie, you and I were kind of going back and forth whether we want to automatically close the registration down once we get up to 80 facilitators, or whether we just keep it open-ended and try to find more facilitators if for some reason we go over 80. So that's up to, this group as well.
Yeah, I'd be curious for the committee's opinion about that. We certainly don't want to exclude any, or prevent anyone from registering if they're interested. So my inclination is to just, it's open and we will monitor the registration very closely. And if we do start getting close, we'll check in when we get to 40, we'll check in when we get to 50, and we'll just have a dialogue going. And if it does start to get higher where we would want to add more facilitators, we'll have to have a conversation about the best way to do that, or the way to have a collaborative conversation. Like maybe one night is better attended than, is better signed up for than others, and we can send out an email saying the other night is more free. If you're available, can you please shift to that night? Something that's sort of collaborative so we can all work for the best outcome.
Yeah.
Does that sound good to everybody on the committee? Okay.
Just a question, and historically, when you have two meetings, is it typical that the first one gets filled up quicker than the second one?
Right. So I think that's why we are specifically having the in-person first, because if we had the virtual meeting first, my concern would be that everyone would try to come to the first virtual meeting. So a lot of times people do try to attend the first of a number, when you have a number of sessions. That being said, then you also have people that say, I can't make this meeting, so I'm going to hit one of the other two sessions. So I think the way we're trying to encourage people to come to the in-person for a few reasons. One, it's 3 hours, so they can take their time, and hit each station as they prefer. And then this also allows for additional questions and answers to take place during the overall workshop. But so that's what we're really trying to encourage people. But if you can't come to the in-person public workshops, then there's the virtual meetings. And so there'll be a slightly different format, but we're still going to be asking the same questions. It's just a little bit more of a concentrated time frame. And then the last option that we're going to give people is that if for some reason you can't come to any of the public workshops, and then we are going to have survey questions that are going to go out that are basically going to ask the same questions, again, to allow people to input that, their information.
Mm-hmm. And I believe we were also going to record some or all of these meetings and make the recording available so folks can watch the recording and then submit any questions or comments over email as well.
Yes. Now, the way the recordings are going to work, though, is that when you do breakout rooms, I will record my own breakout room, and then somebody else is going to have to record their own breakout room. So if we have 4 different breakout rooms, then you're gonna have 4 different recordings for the one session.
Yeah, that's okay. I see Andrea has her hand raised.
Hi, everybody. So I want to go over the downside of having more than 80 people actually show up for the in-person, right? So there will be people that pre-register, I would think, like just like any event that somebody has to RSVP to, you get the people that RSVP and then they don't show up, right? So you want to make sure that you're able to fill those spaces for those that don't show up and are there on time. But then what do you do when you've reached your capacity on that live meeting date and people are being turned away? I don't like that. I don't, that's a bad visual for, so, you know, how do we work through that?
Oh,
Yes.
so the in-person meeting, we can have up to hundreds and hundreds of people. That there's no cap to that. The cap
Okay.
is really the virtual. And the only reason for that is we want to try to make it as interactive as possible. So we want to make sure we have a limited number of like people to facilitator. So we want to keep that ratio of 1 facilitator to no more than 20 people. Because after that, then it starts becoming a situation where you don't really get that dialogue and it's more of the facilitator talking. Then maybe you get somebody raising their hand here and there and not so much of a back and forth, and other people feel that they don't have a chance to speak or really have time to be able to put their thoughts down. So that's what we're trying to limit that. So leading up to that, if for some reason we have 100 people registered, then we'll try to put like 5 facilitators on. I think, if for some reason we really start getting a lot of people registering, we might have to, if we start running out of staff that's available, we might have to, speak to maybe some of the comprehensive plan steering committee members to help, with volunteer and help with a session. So, but we can deal with that when that takes place, because I'm hoping that if for some reason we get over 100 people or, at the in-person meeting, then we have 80 people like signed up at the other 2, then you're already at 160 people participating. So, maybe you can even get more at the in-person meeting, and that would be great. So I think we have enough, planned for the number of people that would participate, especially then you have the other backup of the survey as well. And I think
Thank you.
the other
Thank
thing,
you for clarifying.
oh yeah, no problem. And the other thing that I just wanted to highlight is that because we have the workshop set up the way it is, that if for some reason I decide to go at 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be there at exactly 9:30 when the workshop opens in order to be able to participate.
Yes, just to underscore that, we agree completely, Andrea. We do not want to turn anyone away from the process in any way,
Nope.
shape, or form. And so for the virtual meetings, just to clarify, Valerie, it's 80 for each. So 160 in the virtual meetings, plus whoever comes to the in-person.
Right.
So we'll monitor registration for the virtual meetings very closely. And if we do start getting close to the 80-person threshold, we will talk about options for increasing facilitators in some way.
Exactly.
Or redistributing so that it's relatively equal for each session, or however we can get creative just to make sure everybody has the best experience possible.
Exactly.
Have a door prize for the in-person one.
Right.
It's great that we have different options. I think that the feedback from members of the community has been that they're really grateful that there are multiple calendar days. That way, they can be flexible. They don't have to change their plans to make it to the one opportunity. And also that there's the in-person and the virtual format, and the following up via survey and email format, that everyone really appreciates that. And I think that will really help boost participation.
Will you also be, as you give us so many reminders about this meeting, will it be will the in-person and the Zooms be handled in the same way? That people who register will have multiple reminders?
Yes, well, we're gonna have the register, people that register for the Zoom will be able to send out, thank you for registering, and we'll be able to send out a reminder that you're, the Zoom or the meetings within 24 hours, that type of thing. So that will be the kind of reminders we'll be able to send out. For the in-person meeting, we're gonna, we're setting up a constant contact. There will be an email, save the date, that's going out to everybody that signed up from the public survey and all the stakeholders to say, save the dates. We also have all the other different web blasts that are being distributed, social media.
I'll circle back to the advertising plan at the end.
Yeah. So we're definitely going to blast the in-person meeting date out for sure.
Any other questions about the in-person or the virtual facilitation instructions, or the sort of the run of show, you've called it before, Valerie, how
Yes.
they look and feel? Questions about that or comments? We're good on agenda time, so feel free.
All right, so the last thing I just wanted to touch upon is the survey questions. So we are planning to send out 3 questions, and we're hoping to have these set up, or I'm planning to have these set up so that we have the in-person public meeting, and shortly after the in-person public meeting, we'll post the survey questions. Because again, we really want to encourage people to come to at least one of the meetings, and not because it, as much as when I'm saying that, yes, everyone has the same opportunities to answer the same questions, but I think you'll find that when you participate in a public meeting, you tend to have more thoughts come to mind because somebody else says something that triggers another thought of, to contribute. But there's also the ability that if for some reason you did attend a public meeting and then you had some additional thoughts you wanted to put forth, you can also do that in the survey. So the plan is to send the questions out right after the first public workshop. And basically what it's going to have is like 3 different questions. The first is, what are the 3 biggest challenges facing Lewisboro now or in the next 10 years? The same question is going to be, what are the 3 biggest strengths the town has or could leverage over the next 10 years? And then the third is, the town would like to develop a vision statement for the comprehensive plan. We'd like your input, and it's going to be the same vision statement that's going to be available at the public meetings. So this is a way of, again, getting some additional input if for some reason people are not able to attend any of the other workshops. So we will have this survey open probably for like a week or 2, like I would say probably a couple weeks after the public meeting, but then we want to probably close the survey so we can gather everything together, assess all the data, and then come back to the committee in March to basically present everything that we had found.
Has there, I'm not sure how the relations have been with the school all along with you reaching out to them, but is there any thought to maybe contacting a senior class, either a special subject area, or to get any responses from senior high school students? Do you think that'd be a value, or do you not see that as a value? I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, we can always have the senior students potentially fill out the survey, and then clearly we would, let the school district know if there's a particular class, because a lot of times, like, for example, some of the schools, or at least the high school where my kids go to school, they have this thing called participation in government. And they actually have to participate in and learn about how to participate in your local governments, and they have to go to a meeting. So sometimes when these types of events take place, the social studies teachers will advertise or let the students know that these types of events are taking place. So we can always reach out to the school and let them know that this is taking place, as well as the survey questions, and then ask if they would like to have their students fill out the surveys. Absolutely. Mark?
So I have a question. You might have hit on this before, but it's just been back my mind, and maybe Duffy or Dan or Andrea, can give us some tips. But how do we handle it if somebody tries to hijack the meeting, sort of grabs the mic, grandstands, and I want to know what you're doing about reducing taxes, and I want to know why you got appointed to do this, and how do we manage that sort of scenario?
Right, so the in-person workshop does not have that scenario. Like, that scenario is almost impossible because there won't be microphones, there won't be presentations. It really is somebody coming in and then going to each different workstation. That being said, if somebody wants to, talk about their concerns, or if they have a lot of concerns, or if they have a lot of issues, they can, fill out the Post-it notes. We'll take that, all into consideration. But, so they're able to express their concerns or their issues, but it's in a way that there isn't a large crowd, there isn't microphones, there isn't one person only speaking at any point in time. Each individual person's kind of working their way through the workshop. With the with the virtual sessions, yes, sometimes those situations can take place a little bit more often, but that's why we're keeping the numbers small. And then we're also going to have ground rules that specifically says, like, this is what we're expecting of all the participants. And usually once those ground rules are, identified and listed, I find that a lot of times people do respect those rules. And if for some reason they start dominating, that's when the facilitator might say, okay, thank you very much. We're going to go on to somebody else. We'll get back to you again. Or please, continue, put your thoughts in the chat. We'll take that, from the chat. And then also, allow them to, tell them about the survey that they can follow up or email directly to the Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee to finish up their thoughts.
Okay, thanks.
So there's a number of different avenues, and that's kind of why, I think a lot of times, especially in the past or way some public meetings are run, if people feel like their only avenue to get all their thoughts out is like that moment on that microphone, that's when you get people wanting to dominate the conversation. But if they realize there's a number of different opportunities or different avenues in which to, finish their thoughts and provide all the information or their concerns, that I think then that tends to reduce the amount of time and also the energy that people put into trying to hijack a situation.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Valerie.
You're welcome. All right, any other questions on that? So I think then the next item on our agenda is, we're going to talk about, we need to talk about the accessibility piece too. So you want to, actually, you were sharing your screen with me. Do you have the agenda, Katie, or I can pull it up?
Yep, I can share it right now.
Okay.
Yep, and we can just quickly go through this and address what we've done to address each of these.
So accessibility, so we are planning, it's going to be at the high school cafeteria. Made sure that it's definitely, the room is going to have accessible, it's going to be accessible. We are going to have in-person translators for both Spanish and Chinese speakers right now, but we are going to allow for people. And we're really, the other thing is, in terms of translations, so the in-person, we're having the translators there in person. If somebody needs additional translation, we are asking everybody to let us know 2 weeks ahead of time so that we can bring somebody else in. It's this way, if facilitators there in the room, translators there in the room, they'll be able to walk with that person through the different stations. We are also planning to have the handouts done in both Chinese and Spanish as well. So we'll have those available, and then clearly the English version as well. And then in the virtual meetings, we will have closed captioning, and you can select the language for closed captioning. So they will be able to understand what is being said. Clearly, when the facilitator is writing, they'll be writing in English. But that person, if somebody does not speak English very well or wants to be able to communicate in their language, they can always chat, and then we'll be able to pull that information off. It's not an issue. We can easily get that translated in the future. So we will have that. They will be able to participate as well. But we are going to highlight in the flyers that the in-person, that we will have people there in person. So if for some reason there is somebody that speaks Spanish and they have to pick, and, you know, and they're looking at the 3 different options, hopefully they'll decide, like, you know, the in-person option is the best for them. The other thing we're planning to do for printed and posted materials, we're going to have those all available online ahead of time. So especially the maps, so that people can look at everything. And we're also planning to have the materials as much as possible so that it goes right onto the website, so that people can use the Google Translate if they need those items to be translated. One of the things that we are going to do is we're putting together a couple paragraphs on like what a comprehensive plan is and the comprehensive plan process. So this way that gives people a little bit of background in preparation for the meeting that they're coming to. And then we will also be providing childcare in
I have an
the,
update on that.
yeah, that's you.
So we actually can't, we don't, the town doesn't have the licensing or the insurance coverage to provide childcare. But what we will do instead is provide kids activities, like we can call it a kids table, kids corner, exact language to be determined. But the volunteers that raise their hand to help with childcare, we will redirect them to help wrangle art supplies, you know, get art supplies from families, and set them up, make sure that the table is tidy, and just kind of keep an eye on keeping order in terms of the art supplies and things like that. So I will coordinate volunteers on that front. And if anybody knows of a place or a person that would like to contribute some art supplies, definitely let me know. Or if you have some extra hanging around your house, let me know and we can gather them together.
Great, excellent. And then best practices for virtual meetings. I think we touched upon that a little bit tonight, and we will have that as part of the materials. And then again, as part of the presentation before we go into the actual exercises that evening. So is there anything else that we kind of wanted to leave it open for if anybody else has any other thoughts, questions, comments on this?
I just thought of when you, I know you're thinking about this, but just saying it out loud, large print options for the printed materials for the in-person meeting.
Yes. So I was actually thinking of maybe just printing everything in just right off the bat in like large print. That way we won't have to, you know, because in terms of trying to guess how many people would want like larger print versus smaller print, if we just printed off larger print just for the English versions, I think that would probably be the easiest. And then in terms of the translated versions, we can always print a few copies that are larger print off as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think even people that might not need large print sometimes would opt for the larger print. So.
Okay, and we need to keep an eye on the requests that come through that we're advertising, you know, request accommodations up to 2 weeks before. So if we get those, then we can up the numbers as well.
So on that point, are you going to hand out maps, or are those going to be on screens where they can sort of zoom in and look at them? Or how are the maps going to be handled on the in-person?
So the in-person, there will be large maps. They're usually about 24 by 36 inches actually in the room. So people can just go up to the maps themselves as opposed to printing, because that starts becoming a little bit more, I think you'll find in terms of it gets a little costly because you're going to want to print the maps big. You're going to want to print them on like 11 by 17 and they're in color. So I think you will find that the maps are large enough in the rooms that people can easily go up, take a look at the maps, look at the information. And then you can, and there's not like the way the room circulates again, you could go to the one station, come back, take a look at a map if you'd like. You know, so, and then they'll also be available online if people want to go back later on their computer as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking there might be it might be nice to have something there in case somebody wants to zoom in on a real neighborhood or something. So that in addition to the big posters, maybe I don't know, even a tablet or something so people can focus in to get to small pieces. You know what the maps contain better than I do, but I don't know that that would ever be a consideration. Thanks so
Yes.
much. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the questions or one of the thoughts that we had or concerns that we had at some time in the past was that the Wi-Fi or the availability of being able to use that type of equipment. So I think that's when we decided we were just going to not have that type of equipment available at the in-person public meeting. But if for some reason, you know, we have the ability to really have a strong Wi-Fi, then we might be able to have like a laptop and people can just come and take a look at the maps, you know, in closer and you know, we can have a station set up for that.
The maps will all be available on our website ahead of the meeting as well.
Right.
And
Yes.
we'll let people know that there's pre-reading to be done and pre-exploring to be done so people can come to the meeting having.
Right. So I think, right. So let's talk about that pre-meeting, pre-exploring, because I think you're not going to need that for the in-person meeting. Like the in-person meeting will have, like, you're going to have the handouts, you're going to have everything. So in terms of the virtual meetings, we will have posted, you know, what a comprehensive plan is, the comprehensive plan process. And then we will have, you know, we can even have like a similar handout saying this is what we're going to, you know, undertake as part of the overall meeting. And then we can also have the presentation posted ahead of time as well. But I don't think there's not, you know, because if you think about it, this is really just, you know, getting people's opinions on what they think their strengths are. So there's really not pre-reading that needs to, or, you know, a steep learning curve. You know, people live in the community, they'll be able to, you know, right off the bat, start, you know, giving their opinions on various aspects of the community.
That's true. I was only thinking of the presentation, and that'll be made available before the in-person meeting.
Yes.
And the maps. So that's really
Yeah.
good.
Yes. I'm hoping to try to get all the materials out. That's why we worked so hard to develop these, like run a show now. I want to get all this stuff available, get it translated and have everything ready to go, you know, pretty quickly right after the holidays so that everything's posted a couple weeks ahead of time.
Great. I see Dan has his hand raised.
Yeah, just on the same subject. So I'm trying to understand. So we're not going to encourage people to sort of like use the map as a tool to facilitate their discussions or the breakouts or the other materials, because leading it to the second question, and I think I hear you saying like we're not going to worry about trying to facilitate, you know, Wi-Fi or connections. Like, should people, you know, if they've been good studious citizens and like been looking at all this documentation and come in ready and they want to bring their computer, should they or shouldn't they? You know, are we encouraging it?
Sure. I mean, people, right. People can absolutely bring in, like, we're going to have, like I said, we're going to have maps available. So like, you know, there will be maps already, there's going to be like 5 or 6 maps already in the room itself, right? So that people can already look at that. If they have very specific concerns, you know, we usually a lot of times will have another map, just the map printed out so that people can actually draw on the map if they'd like to say like this area here or this particular property. But I think you'll find that, you know, with those maps and then having things posted ahead of time, if somebody wants to come in with something very specific, that's fine. But I think a lot of times the information that's being provided is not so much, the information that's being provided will have like where your parks are located or where the land uses are. So I think in terms of people really needing to know about information ahead of time of the meeting, I don't think that's really necessary because we're asking people what they like about the community or what they have concerns about. So I think a lot of that they already know, and then that's really, so they don't really need to have a lot of background information going into this meeting. I guess that's my point.
Okay, but there will be, we do anticipate we'll get the access to the Wi-Fi or they shouldn't figure on that. Or it won't, I guess that just doesn't matter.
Well, I think, well, we set up the meeting so it doesn't matter, but
Okay.
if people, I assume that it's a school, so I assume that there will be Wi-Fi available. I just don't really know how strong the Wi-Fi is in the gymnasium. And, you know, I know some schools have more Wi-Fi, you know, issues than others in terms of, you know, the way their Wi-Fi is set up.
Okay, something that could be investigated a little bit, I expect, but
Yeah, we can
I
always
mean, I
ask.
would assume they use the Wi-Fi for voting at the high school because they, you know, you had the iPads
Right,
and things like that. But that said, I know that they're not like real thrilled about giving out their passwords.
right.
But
Okay, I'm making a note to inquire.
Right, so if we want to have like a station where we have a couple laptops and, you know, people can look at the maps, you know, look at maps, that we can absolutely do that. But I think in terms of the virtual meeting, that's where the maps get a little bit more difficult, because you saw the maps today. You know, I would have to zoom in, that takes time. And the other issue is that, you know, depending upon, I mean, a lot of people will come onto meetings looking on their meeting on their smartphone, right? So then looking at a map on a phone is very, very difficult. So very few people, I find, come to meetings with, you know, come to a Zoom meeting on a full large scale, large screen, you know, computer screen. So I think in terms of the maps are the the virtual meetings we're setting up a little bit differently. And, you know, we will have the maps posted ahead of time for people to look at. They will be part of the whole inventory analysis report, but we will be providing them some tables and some snapshots, and then we'll be going into just the basic discussion. For the hamlet areas, when we actually have meetings on the hamlet areas, I anticipate having a map of like the hamlet areas, because they're going to be smaller areas. We'll be able to zoom in a little bit more on that. Any other questions?
You may have said this already, but are there going to be, will there be one or two people in each room? Leading
For
the
the virtual meetings.
for both, for the virtual and the in-person.
So the virtual meeting, we're planning right now to have 4 facilitators with no more than 20 people per facilitator.
So there'll be one person in the chat room with 20 people.
That's correct.
Okay, and in the in-person?
In the in-person, there will be probably about 4 people within the room itself, working the room.
Okay, okay.
And that's plenty of people.
Okay, if there are any other questions about the sort of logistics of the day of, I guess I should also mention that in terms of this group, we're inviting everybody who lives and works in Lewisboro. So everybody that works for the town, even if they don't live in Lewisboro, is invited to attend. Everybody here is invited to attend. We're going to talk about this later, but I'm hoping we can have a steering committee huddle in January. We'll kind of talk about our role. I want to make sure we have people walking around and experiencing it and taking feedback, you know, on how's the format, how are you enjoying the experience, and sort of like collect feedback that way, because we're going to have more of these. We're going to have more in the spring of 2023 and at the end of 2023. So I think it's our role as the steering committee and related parties just to make sure that we kind of get a feel for how it's going and give feedback, so how we can Valerie and her team can get better and better every time. I'm sure they're going to do a fabulous job up front, I should say, but better and better every time. So yeah, we'll be circling back to that, the role of that in the in January. Question, Jan?
Yeah, I'm sure you've thought about this, but if we have to, and I don't want to be the doomsayer, but if we have to cancel the in-person because of weather, how will, I mean, I think maybe as we advertise it, we should be telling people
We have a
if
weather
there's
day.
questions, how do, how will you find out? It'll be posted somewhere. So even so that they know to go look there as they reserve. Maybe I guess you're collecting emails if people reserve places, or how, just thinking through that.
So
Right.
because we're not pre-registering for the in-person meeting, we need to we will be directing everyone to our website. That will be the place where people get information. We have the weather date. The meeting's January 21st. We have the weather date January 28th. So when we have the next round of flyers, we will make sure to note, like, watch the website for day of information. That also has to apply to COVID protocols as well, that's where we will post. But I don't think we can put information about that on the flyer, because we are getting the flyers published leading up to January 1st, and things will be changing so much. So we need to direct everyone to our website. That's a great point.
Right, and I think we can also do web blasts, right? So I'm a firm believer that we should not make the call like the day of the meeting or like the evening before the meeting, because then that becomes, there's always confusion. So what we'll do is, if leading up to it, there looks like to be bad weather or a storm coming in, a couple days before, we can make that decision. Because by that time, we'll also know what's kind of coming around the corner for the next week too. Charlene?
And we'll have the emails of those in the groups that's distributing the information. We'll have a lot of those emails. So if we have a team leader for their neighborhood, we send it to them. I mean, I've been collecting business emails, so we can do it that way, I think. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right, and that's another reason why we'll make the decision a couple days ahead of time, because that gives plenty of time to get everybody to be able to send the information out as well.
Yes. So to that point, just touching quickly on our advertising plan. So we have, just gonna share my screen. We've had really great success with our community outreach teams. Oh, sorry, Andrea, do you have a question? You're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't see that. I didn't put my hand down, so I apologize. I do not have a question.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, so advertising plan. We have great community outreach teams. All of the community outreach teams have been communicating with their team leaders. So as a reminder, we have teams for the hamlets. We also have a Lakes team. We have a Spanish speaking outreach team and a Chinese speaking outreach team. And so phase one, we are in right now, phase one advertising. We're just doing electronic distribution of the flyers, all the usual places, both newspapers, social media, email. We have our list of email addresses that is like 550 addresses strong. And we're going to be sending out a constant contact blast to them tomorrow. Then phase two will be in January. And that's when our outreach team are actually going to take paper flyers and post them throughout town. And because we have so many great volunteers, and because we have them divvied up by hamlet and they each have their own sign-up sheet, we're really hopeful and excited that we're going to have a lot of coverage in terms of flyers, all the local spots, the businesses, the parks, at a minimum, every grocery store and post office, and the town offices at a bare minimum. And I feel confident we'll be able to lean on our volunteers to do that. So those flyers are different than the save the date we have now. That they're going to have the information about how you register, how you need to monitor the website for weather or COVID protocol updates. They'll indicate which meetings have translators. They'll ask you to request accessibility features, including translators via email, all that good stuff. So I hope that answers questions about how we're distributing information. I just wanted everybody to see that. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with the outreach teams. And again, thank you so much to the outreach team leaders and all the volunteers. If you're listening, we're so grateful for your help. We really appreciate it. I think that was everything. Does anybody have any questions for Valerie about the project or the logistics and advertising and that kind of stuff?
No.
Jan?
Yeah, so this is not specifically on this, but Valerie, you mentioned that you hope to get us some draft information next week on the initial assessment. Do you have a preferred way of getting any feedback? Should we wait for a meeting? Should we send emails? Should we mark up the PDFs? What would you like?
So I think that, I think best thing to do is for the committee, I mean, you can decide a couple of different ways. Maybe the best thing to do is like for you to mark up your comments and submit those to maybe Katie. And then that way Katie can kind of collect them all and then can funnel them to me. It probably would also be good if for some reason, I think there was some discussion to maybe sending the document out to others outside of the comprehensive plan steering committee. And if that takes place, then I would recommend then having to, once you get all the different comments, then cull through all the comments and then identify which ones need to be addressed and which ones don't need to be addressed. Because sometimes you might find that some comments come in that, you know, people may identify and say, well, wouldn't it be really interesting if we know this additional data, or wouldn't it be interesting if we have this, or, you know, maybe the town needs to have 5 more parks, or, you know, so some things will be comments on the inventory analysis. Some things might be comments on just, here's just a general comment to the overall like comprehensive plan process. So trying to kind of cull through so that we can identify what needs to be incorporated into the document. A lot of it is going to be, and I'll try to provide that information in email, but a lot of it is going to be, again, because it's like a snapshot. So, you know, we're looking for inaccurate information. So if something is, you know, inaccurate, or if there's like an error, like you pointed out in the table tonight, or we repeated something, you know, that's clearly something, those are clearly things we're going to want to fix. But if there's also information, like, let's say, for example, that there's a study that we missed, right? That you're like, oh, wait, they didn't, you know, they must not have been given this information. That would be great to say, you need to add in some information about this new study that was done recently. And so then it would be very helpful then to also have that study sent to us as well, so that we can incorporate that. So those are the kind of things that we're really looking for in terms of the inventory analysis. But, you know, you also sometimes, I have received comments from people on the, you know, over past reports where people want like to have more synthesis, or, you know, or want to know about like, oh, is the, like, for example, would Nelson Pope and Voorhees be doing like this type of study, or this type of study, or that type of study? And those might be actual recommendations to put into the comprehensive plan, right? So those are kind of comments that might not necessarily be for to correct the inventory analysis, but might be ones that are like, wow, this would be a really good potential recommendation for the comprehensive plan. So that's where you'll have to kind of cull through that. Now that's assuming you get back 30 different documents of comments, right? You might review this and everybody has just a handful of comments, and then that's fine. Then you can send those different, individual documents over and I can synthesize them. So I think it really just depends on how many comments come back.
When did you say you'll send that, Valerie?
I'm going to send it probably next week. It is going to be in PDF specifically because all the maps are going to be in it. If for some reason,
how about you and I just get together offline and we will outline very specifically, here's how to provide your comments, here's who to send your comments to, and we'll just make it crystal clear.
yeah, I think that's perfect. And I don't want to give you like a hard, again, and I think sometimes my answers are a little bit in the gray area, but it really just depends. I've had comprehensive plans that only one person submits comments on. And so at that point, then sure, I'll take all their comments and respond. And I've had other ones where, you get like, 30 different people want to comment. And so it's easier to have the committee then review that and say, yes, this comment needs to be addressed. No, this one does not.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Before we adjourn, I want to make sure we're on time, but I just want to draw everyone's attention to our next meetings. So we have a proposed change for the full group for February. We're hoping to change to February 27th, just to give a little bit more space between when the meetings actually happen, to give Valerie and her team time to digest and come back to us with actual substantial comments. Is that okay for everybody? Well, you'll let me know via email. Steering committee, if we can have a working session on January 9th, I think that would be great, just to kind of iron out some of the logistics and make sure we're all on the same page before the meetings.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I just want to also prepare this committee for, so once we come out of the first public workshop, and then we will have, like I said, in February, we'll have a discussion of the public workshop, but then we're going to start very quickly going right into goals and identifying those goals, and then objectives will come shortly after that. So when we start looking at the goals, because we're going to start developing, I'm going to have some draft goals for you to start looking at, because then shortly after that, those goals are going to be presented as part of the second public workshop. So we will be dealing with a number of different, it's going to feel like things are kind of ramping up from here, because we'll be dealing with the first public workshop, starting to develop the goals, starting to develop objectives, get feedback on the goals and objectives from the public. And then we go right into, developing the plan, and then ultimately starting to look at some of the zoning changes.
That's very helpful context. Okay, so I want to be conscious of ending on time. Any follow-up questions, comments, please send the group an email. And if anything comes up, in the coming weeks, let us know as well. Keep your eyes on your email for the versions of the flyers for everybody to take a look at before they get published in the new year. But thank you all so much for your time and dedication to the project, and we're really excited for what's to come in the new year. Okay, motion to adjourn meeting. Can I get a second? Everyone's on mute.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks so much, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Have a good holiday.
Take care, everybody. Be well.
Take care.
Bye.